In the deepest chambers beneath the surface world, where the light of the sun has never touched stone, there exists a creature so fundamentally alien that its very existence challenges the natural order. The Beholder, known to scholars as the Eye Tyrant or the Sphere of Many Eyes, this aberration represents something far more disturbing than a mere monster to be catalogued and defeated. It represents a fundamental rejection of everything terrestrial life considers normal, natural, or comprehensible. The casual adventurer knows the Beholder as a dangerous opponent, certainly, a floating orb covered in magical eyes that can petrify, disintegrate, or charm those foolish enough to enter its lair. This surface understanding, while not incorrect, barely scratches the chitinous hide of what these creatures truly are. The reality of the Beholder extends far beyond a collection of combat statistics or a memorable appearance. These entities possess a psychology so warped, a society so paradoxical, and a diversity of forms so extensive that entire academic careers have been devoted to their study, only to end with the researcher no closer to true understanding than when they began. Consider for a moment the fundamental strangeness of the Beholder's existence. This creature did not evolve. It did not adapt over eons to fill an ecological niche. It did not develop its abilities in response to environmental pressures. The Beholder simply is, as if reality itself was forced to accommodate something that wandered in from outside the boundaries of normal existence. Its body defies gravity without wings or magical apparatus. Its eyes produce effects that mirror the most powerful spells known to arcane practitioners, yet it possesses no spellbook, performs no incantations, and requires no components. The magic simply emanates from its flesh, as naturally as heat radiates from fire. The true horror of the Beholder lies not in its power, though that power is considerable. The true horror lies in its mind. Every Beholder exists in a state of absolute certainty regarding its own supremacy. Not the supremacy of Beholder kind as a species, mind you, but the supremacy of that specific, individual Beholder. Each one gazes upon reality through that massive central eye and sees a universe that exists solely to acknowledge its perfection. All other beings, including other Beholders, are viewed as either failed copies or resources to be exploited. This is not arrogance in the way humanoids understand the term. Arrogance implies some possibility of doubt, some capacity to be proven wrong. The Beholder knows it is supreme with the same certainty that a stone knows it is hard. What follows is an examination of the truths that lie beneath the common knowledge, the anatomical impossibilities that grant these creatures their power, the psychological aberrations that drive their behavior, the combat doctrines that make them among the most dangerous opponents in existence, the bizarre evolutionary offshoots that have spawned an entire family of spherical nightmares, and, perhaps most disturbing of all, the ways in which mortal practitioners of magic have sought to capture and replicate the Beholder's power for themselves. This is not merely a bestiary entry expanded to greater length. This is an exploration of something genuinely alien that has taken up residence in the world's dark places and the implications of its presence. To understand the Beholder is to first confront its physical form, a form so divorced from normal biological architecture that it borders on the obscene. The true Beholder manifests as an 8-foot wide sphere of flesh, hovering impossibly in midair. This is not levitation in the sense that a wizard might understand the term, requiring concentration and effort. The Beholder's body is simply buoyant, as if the air itself were dense enough to support its bulk. This magical buoyancy operates with such reliability that even when a Beholder is rendered unconscious or killed, it descends gently rather than plummeting, protected by an effect functionally identical to the Featherfall spell, yet requiring no active maintenance. The sphere itself is dominated by two primary features, each disturbing in its own right. The first is the mouth, a gaping maw filled with teeth like daggers, suitable for rending flesh should the creature's magical arsenal somehow prove insufficient. The second is the central eye, massive and unblinking, staring forward with an intensity that suggests not merely vision, but judgment. This eye does not simply see, it projects a cone of absolute anti-magic, extending 150 feet forward, creating a zone where all magical and supernatural effects cease to function. Spells unravel, enchantments dissolve. The very fabric of worked magic comes undone within that terrible gaze. But it is the 10 eye stalks that truly define the beholder's appearance and threat. These appendages protrude from the top of the sphere, writhing independently of one another, each tipped with a smaller eye. These stalks possess an almost serpentine quality in their movement, weaving and searching, constantly surveying the environment from every possible angle. This grants the beholder something that few creatures possess: truly complete spatial awareness. The creature cannot be flanked, cannot be approached from a blind spot, cannot be surprised by an attack from an unexpected angle. Every direction is visible to at least some portion of its ocular array at all times. The independence of these eye stalks creates a form of sensory experience utterly alien to creatures with merely 2 eyes facing forward. Imagine perceiving 10 different visual fields simultaneously, each capable of independent focus and attention, while also processing the information from the massive central eye. The cognitive architecture required to manage such input without descending into sensory chaos suggests a mind structured along fundamentally different principles than those of terrestrial beings. Some scholars have suggested that each eye stalk possesses a fragment of independent awareness, a submind devoted to its specific function, all coordinated by the central consciousness residing in the sphere itself. This brings us to the practical limitations of the beholder's form. Despite possessing 10 eye stalks, the physical structure of its spherical body restricts the creature's ability to bring all of them to bear simultaneously. The geometry simply does not allow it. When engaging opponents, a beholder can direct no more than 3 eye stalks at any target within a 90-degree arc. This constraint forces tactical consideration in combat. The creature must orient its body carefully, tilting and rotating its bulk to bring specific eyes to bear on specific threats. Against multiple opponents surrounding it, the beholder must prioritize which targets receive which rays, constantly adjusting its position to maintain optimal firing arcs. The buoyancy that grants the beholder flight operates at a speed of approximately 20 feet per round, slower than a running human, but with the crucial advantage of 3-dimensional mobility. In the vertical layers these creatures favor, this speed proves more than adequate. The beholder does not need to outpace fleeing prey in a straightforward chase. It needs only to position itself optimally within the 3-dimensional maze of its own territory, using choke points and vertical shafts to control engagement distance and line of sight. The alien anatomy becomes a tactical advantage when paired with alien architecture. This physical form, hovering sphere covered in independently mobile eyes, creates immediate psychological impact on those who encounter it. The human mind, evolved to recognize threats based on terrestrial predator patterns, finds nothing familiar in the beholder's appearance, no face to read for emotional cues, no body language suggesting intention or mood, no limbs to watch for telegraphed attacks. Just the sphere, the eyes, and the implicit wrongness of something that floats where it should fall, that sees where nothing should have vision, that exists in defiance of every instinct about how living creatures should be structured. The anatomy itself serves as a weapon, triggering primal unease in those who witness it. The physical form would be disturbing enough on its own, but the true lethality of the beholder lies in the magical arsenal it wields through those 10 smaller eyes. Each eye stalk can produce a distinct ray, an effect mirroring some of the most powerful spells in arcane tradition, yet requiring no components, no preparation, no study. The magic simply exists as an extension of the creature's being, as natural and effortless as a human's ability to grasp or a bird's ability to fly. The charm effects demonstrate the beholder's tactical sophistication. Two of its rays can produce charm person and charm monster effects, respectively, magical compulsions that rewrite a target's loyalties and perceptions. A beholder employs these not out of any desire for genuine companionship, but as tools to create chaos within enemy formations. A charmed fighter will turn on their companions at the beholder's command. A charmed wizard will waste their prepared spells attacking their former allies. The Eye Tyrant understands that the most efficient way to neutralize a coordinated group is to make them fight themselves, and it uses charm rays with cold calculation to achieve exactly that outcome. The Sleep Ray targets a different vulnerability entirely. Warriors and physical combatants, despite their martial prowess, remain creatures of flesh, subject to exhaustion. A beholder recognizes that the heavily armored fighter charging forward represents a significant threat if allowed to close distance. The Sleep Ray eliminates that threat instantly, dropping the warrior into magical slumber before their weapon can connect. This ray sees frequent use in the opening moments of combat, removing the most immediate physical dangers and buying the beholder time to assess and neutralize the more complex threats presented by spellcasters and ranged attackers. The flesh-to-stone ray represents perhaps the most psychologically cruel weapon in the beholder's arsenal. Certainly, it serves a tactical purpose, transforming dangerous opponents into harmless statuary. But beholders use this ray with disturbing frequency on targets that pose no real threat, petrifying creatures whose appearance the Eye Tyrant finds interesting or amusing. The resulting statues are then kept as decoration, arranged throughout the lair in grotesque displays. A successful adventuring party penetrating deep into a beholder's domain might discover dozens of petrified victims, each frozen in their final moment of terror, serving no purpose except as testament to the creature's cruel sense of aesthetics. When the beholder identifies a target as a genuine, immediate, existential threat, it escalates to lethal force without hesitation. The Disintegrate Ray reduces matter to dust, leaving not even a corpse behind. The Finger of Death Ray stops the heart and extinguishes the life force instantly. These rays are reserved for opponents that have proven themselves dangerous enough to warrant immediate, permanent removal. A spellcaster who successfully penetrates the beholder's defenses to land a powerful spell. A warrior who shrugs off lesser rays and continues advancing. A rogue who demonstrates the capacity to avoid the beholder's attacks through speed and cunning. These threats receive no second chances. The supporting rays demonstrate the beholder's understanding of action, economy, and tactical control. The slow ray cripples survivors of lethal attacks, ensuring that even if they somehow endured disintegration or death magic, they lack the speed to press their advantage or retreat to safety. The Fear Ray breaks formations and sends clusters of enemies fleeing in panic, transforming an organized assault into a rout. The Inflict Moderate Wounds Ray provides straightforward damage for targets not important enough to warrant the energy expenditure of more powerful effects. Each ray serves a specific purpose in the beholder's tactical doctrine. The Telekinesis Ray adds a dimension of battlefield control that many opponents fail to anticipate. With the ability to manipulate objects or creatures weighing up to 325 pounds, the beholder can seize opponents and hurl them into hazards, snatch away weapons or shields, or simply suspend dangerous enemies in midair where they can neither advance nor retreat. In the vertical architecture of a beholder's lair, telekinesis becomes even more potent, allowing the creature to drop enemies down shafts or prevent them from climbing to reach its position. But all of this magical offense exists in tension with the beholder's greatest defensive tool, the anti-magic cone projected by its central eye. This cone suppresses all magical effects within its area, including the beholder's own eye rays. This creates a constant tactical calculation. When facing enemy spellcasters, the beholder can point its central eye toward them, negating their magical abilities entirely. But while maintaining this defensive posture, the beholder cannot use its own eye rays against those same targets. The creature must constantly choose between offense and defense, opening its central eye to attack and closing it to shut down enemy magic. This limitation transforms beholder combat into a deadly dance of positioning and timing. The Eye Tyrant must track which opponents pose magical threats and which pose physical ones, rotating its body to suppress enemy casters with the anti-magic cone while bringing its eye rays to bear on martial opponents. Against a well-coordinated party that splits up and attacks from multiple directions, this juggling act becomes exponentially more complex. The beholder's intelligence allows it to manage this tactical complexity, but it remains a constraint that clever opponents can exploit. To understand how beholders use these abilities in practice requires examining not just their physical and magical capabilities, but the alien psychology driving their strategic decisions. The beholder mind operates on principles fundamentally disconnected from the thought patterns of terrestrial life. Every beholder exists in a state of absolute, unshakable megalomaniacal certainty regarding its own supremacy and the corresponding inferiority of all other beings. This is not mere arrogance, not the inflated ego of a powerful creature that has dominated its environment for so long that it has forgotten caution. The beholder's sense of supremacy is definitional, axiomatic, as fundamental to its existence as its ability to hover or project magical rays. A beholder gazes upon the universe and perceives with perfect clarity that it is the pinnacle of existence, the ideal form, the supreme expression of what a sentient being should be. This perception is not a belief that can be challenged through argument or demonstration. It is the foundational truth upon which all of the beholder's other thoughts and decisions are built. This psychological aberration manifests in grandiose self-styling. Beholders adopt titles of baroque complexity and implicit authority, supreme majesty of the 12 caverns, all-seeing overlord of the lightless depths, perfect one whose gaze unmakes reality. These are not titles granted by others or earned through deed. The beholder simply declares them as obvious truths, requiring no justification. When a beholder refers to itself as supreme, it is not making a boast. It is stating a fact as self-evident as the hardness of stone or the wetness of water. The corollary to this supreme self-regard is the beholder's absolute contempt for all other forms of life. Humanoids are viewed as vermin, potentially useful as slaves, but fundamentally inferior creatures whose lives have value only insofar as they serve the beholder's purposes. Dragons, despite their power and intelligence, are merely large beasts to be dominated or destroyed. Demons and devils are dimensional intruders with delusions of significance. Every category of being is assessed and dismissed as fundamentally lesser than the beholder evaluating it. But here the psychology turns truly alien, because this xenophobic hatred extends without diminishment to other beholders. Each beholder perceives itself as the sole example of true, ideal beholderhood. All other beholders are viewed as flawed, inferior copies that have somehow failed to achieve the perfection embodied in the observing beholder. The exact shape of an eye stalk, the precise shade of hide coloration, the specific texture of skin, the particular dimensions of the central eye, any deviation from the observing beholder's own characteristics is perceived as a grotesque flaw that offends the natural order. This creates a paradox that defines beholder society, or rather, the near total absence of beholder society. Two beholders meeting are two beings, each absolutely convinced of its own supremacy and the other's inferiority. Both possess the intelligence to recognize that their opponent is a dangerous, highly capable combatant. But both are also incapable of the psychological flexibility required for compromise, cooperation, or peaceful coexistence. The result is almost inevitably violent confrontation, each beholder seeking to eliminate this offensive mockery of proper form that has had the audacity to exist within its awareness. On extremely rare occasions, small groups of beholders do form temporary alliances, but these represent clusters of mutual paranoia rather than genuine cooperation. The beholders circle each other constantly, each watching for signs that another is about to betray the group. Combat erupts with regularity over perceived slights, disagreements about tactics, or simple proximity-induced irritation. These alliances collapse as frequently as they form, usually violently, leaving sole survivors who return to the species' natural state of solitary existence. This psychology of isolation and supremacy shapes everything about how beholders interact with the world. They do not build communities. They build domains, personal empires, where their word is absolute law, inhabited entirely by slaves and servants who exist to acknowledge the beholder's supremacy through their obedience. The beholder does not seek conversation or companionship, it seeks acknowledgement. It wants other beings to consciously recognize and accept their own inferiority, to willingly subordinate themselves, not out of fear, but out of genuine recognition that they exist in the presence of their superior. This desire for acknowledged supremacy creates a strange dynamic in beholder lairs. While the creature is fully capable of killing intruders on sight, many beholders instead prefer to capture and dominate them, adding them to the collection of thralls. A mind broken by charm effects and conditioning, freely offering submission and service, provides more satisfaction than a corpse. The beholder wants reality itself to acknowledge its supremacy, and reality does so most clearly when intelligent beings consciously choose to serve. The paranoia underlying all of this cannot be overstated. The beholder knows it is supreme, but it also knows that other beings are too inferior to recognize this truth without constant reinforcement. Therefore, every action by every creature in its domain is assessed for signs of disloyalty, betrayal, or insufficient acknowledgement of the beholder's status. Slaves are tested constantly. Failures are punished with immediate, lethal violence. The beholder's lair becomes a realm of terror where survival depends on perfectly calibrated demonstrations of submission, repeated endlessly, because the beholder can never be entirely certain that the submission is genuine rather than calculated self-preservation. This psychology of paranoid supremacy manifests physically in the architecture of beholder lairs and the tactical doctrines these creatures employ when defending their domains. Because beholders fly naturally and effortlessly, they design their lairs with three-dimensional thinking entirely foreign to ground-bound humanoids. The typical beholder fortress is not a series of horizontal corridors and rooms. It is a vertical maze, a complex of tubes and chambers stacked on top of each other, connected by shafts that plunge or rise at steep angles. These architectural choices serve multiple tactical purposes simultaneously. First, they limit access. A party of humanoid adventurers entering a beholder's lair must constantly climb, rappel, or find creative solutions to navigate between chambers. This slows their advance to a crawl, giving the beholder ample warning of their presence and approach. Second, vertical spaces eliminate many of the tactical advantages that ground-based fighters rely upon. There is no solid footing for a proper sword stance. No stable surface from which to launch a coordinated charge. The fundamental physics of melee combat become unreliable when fighting on walls or dangling from ropes. Third, and most importantly, vertical architecture creates ideal firing positions for the beholder's ranged magical attacks. The creature can hover at the top of a shaft, its anti-magic cone pointing downward to suppress any magical assistance the climbers might employ, while its eye stalks rain rays downward on helpless targets who can neither advance toward it nor retreat with any speed. A beholder fighting in its lair is not engaging in combat so much as conducting an execution, picking off intruders one by one as they struggle through an environment specifically designed to neutralize every advantage they might possess. The carving of these lairs demonstrates another aspect of beholder capabilities, often overlooked in simple combat analyses. The disintegrate ray, so lethal when turned against living targets, serves equally well as a construction tool. A beholder can carve through solid stone with its disintegrate ray as easily as a mason-shaped soft clay. Over years or decades, a single beholder can excavate an enormous underground complex, creating precisely the architectural features it desires without any need for labor, tools, or assistance. The lair itself becomes an extension of the beholder's will, shaped according to its tactical preferences and aesthetic whims. Consider the documented example of Verorax, a beholder that claimed a massive mushroom cavern as its territory. This specimen demonstrated sophisticated defensive planning that goes well beyond simple reliance on raw magical power. Variorax organized its domain in layers, creating concentric rings of progressively more dangerous hazards. The outer reaches were patrolled by Darrow, degenerate subterranean humanoids whose minds had been broken through repeated charm effects and conditioning. These thralls served as an early warning system, their deaths alerting Variorax to intruders long before those intruders reached the inner sanctum. Variorax also demonstrated sophisticated use of environmental hazards. The mushroom cavern contained extensive patches of yellow mold, a fungus that releases lethal spores when disturbed. Rather than clearing these hazards to make the lair safer for itself, Variorax carefully cataloged the location of each mold patch and incorporated them into its defensive strategy. The creature's accumulated treasure was deliberately placed within or near the yellow mold, forcing would-be thieves to choose between abandoning the prize or exposing themselves to deadly spores. During combat, Variorax attempted to maneuver intruders into the mold through tactical positioning and use of its telekinesis ray. The combat doctrine Variorax employed reflects broader patterns seen across beholder behavior. The creature used the enormous mushrooms growing throughout its cavern as cover, hovering behind them and pecking around the edges to fire its most lethal rays disintegrate, finger of death, flesh to stone. This hit and fade approach minimized its exposure to counterattack while maximizing its offensive output. Only when severely wounded did Variorax consider retreat, and even then it covered its escape by using its slow ray on the most dangerous pursuers. This tactical sophistication extends to the beholder's management of its anti-magic cone during combat. Against a party, including both spellcasters and martial combatants, the beholder must constantly make real-time decisions about when to activate the cone. If enemy spellcasters are preparing powerful attack spells, the anti-magic cone pointing in their direction neutralizes the threat entirely. But maintaining that defensive posture means the beholder cannot use its own eye rays against those targets. The creature must project threats multiple steps ahead, predicting when enemies will cast spells versus when they will attack physically, adjusting its central eye position accordingly. Clever opponents can exploit this limitation by forcing the beholder to choose between bad options. A fighter charging from one direction while a wizard casts from another creates a dilemma. Suppress the wizard's magic and take physical damage from the fighter, or attack the fighter with eye rays and risk taking a fireball to its bulbous hide. Coordinated parties that split up and attack from multiple angles exponentially increase the complexity of these decisions, potentially overwhelming even the beholder's formidable intelligence. The lair itself often contains additional creatures beyond the beholder, though not as equals or allies. Beholders frequently maintain collections of dominated humanoids, each carefully chosen for specific purposes. Intelligent thralls serve as advisors, though the beholder rarely actually takes their advice, viewing them more as thinking tools that occasionally produce useful information. Physically powerful slaves serve as expendable guards positioned at lair entrances to delay intruders. Some beholders even maintain what amount to menageries, collections of exotic creatures kept as living trophies or petrified through the flesh to stone ray and arranged as decorative statuary. The vertical architecture, the environmental hazards, the layers of dominated servants, the tactical use of cover, and the anti-magic cone, all of this combines to make assaulting a beholder in its own lair one of the deadliest undertakings an adventuring party can attempt. The beholder is not simply present in its lair, it is integrated with it, has shaped it specifically to amplify its strengths and minimize its weaknesses. Every chamber, every shaft, Every sightline has been calculated and optimized. The intruders are not entering a dungeon to fight a monster. They are entering an organism to confront its immune system, and they are the infection being systematically purged. Despite the terror represented by the true beholder, that species is merely one expression of a broader category of spherical aberrations, collectively known as beholderkin. The chaotic influence of the far realm, combined with millennia of magical experimentation and the strange reproductive peculiarities of these creatures, has produced numerous variant species. Each shares the basic spherical body plan, but their abilities, sizes, and ecological roles vary dramatically. The Goth represents perhaps the most commonly encountered beholderkin variant, though calling it common remains relative given the rarity of all these creatures. Sometimes termed the lesser beholder, the Goth is a 4-foot-wide orb, half the diameter of a true eye tyrant. It possesses 6 eye stalks rather than 10, and its central eye projects not anti-magic, but a stunning gaze that can incapacitate those who meet its stare. The Goth shares the true beholder's xenophobic temperament and megalomaniacal certainty, making it equally dangerous despite its reduced size. What distinguishes the Goth beyond its physical characteristics is its unusual diet. This creature feeds primarily on magical energy rather than conventional sustenance. A Goth hunts not for meat, but for enchanted items, spell effects, and concentrated magical power. It will attack adventuring parties specifically to drain the magic from their weapons, armor, and carried items, absorbing the enchantments as nutrition. This creates a particular kind of threat profile. Even if a party successfully defeats a Goth, they may find their magical equipment reduced to mundane status, the enchantments consumed by the creature before its death. The 6 eye stalks of the Goth produce effects somewhat less lethal than those of the true beholder, but no less tactically relevant. The sleep ray appears here as well, still serving its purpose of neutralizing martial threats. The inflict moderate wounds ray provides straightforward damage. But the Goth also wields a dispel magic ray, which it uses not in conventional counterspelling, but specifically to suppress magical items and beneficial spell effects on its opponents. A fighter relying on an enchanted sword finds the weapon suddenly mundane. A wizard protected by stone skin watches the magical armor dissolve under the Goth's dispelling attention. The remaining rays include paralysis, which immobilizes targets entirely, making them helpless against follow-up attacks. Scorching ray, providing ranged fire damage, and exhaustion, which drains the target's physical stamina and resilience. Like the true beholder, the Goth can only aim a limited number of eyes within any specific arc during a given moment of combat, forcing it to make tactical decisions about which rays to deploy against which targets. The creature shares the true beholder's inability to be flanked and constant 360-degree awareness, making it exceptionally difficult to ambush or surprise. The Death Kiss represents an entirely different evolutionary direction, abandoning magic entirely in favor of a more visceral threat. This massive creature spans 10 feet in diameter, making it larger than even the true beholder. Its leathery, mottled gray skin suggests something that has adapted to specific environmental pressures absent from other beholderkin. The central eye possesses no special powers whatsoever, serving only conventional visual purposes. The 10 appendages protruding from its body are not eye stalks, but tentacles, each ending in a blood-draining mouth filled with sharp teeth. The Death Kiss operates as a solitary predator in the deep Underdark, hunting through ambush rather than magical bombardment. It strikes by extending its tentacles to grab prey, latching multiple mouths onto the victim and draining blood. This feeding process serves dual purposes. The blood provides nutrition, obviously, but the Death Kiss also converts this stolen vitality into electrical energy that powers its unusual metabolism and heals its injuries. A Death Kiss, in the process of feeding, grows stronger with each passing moment, regenerating damage through the life force it steals. The electrical nature of the Death Kiss creates additional hazards beyond the immediate threat of the tentacles. The creature generates a constant electrical aura surrounding its body. Any opponent striking it with a metal melee weapon finds electricity arcing up the weapon to shock them, turning their own attack into a source of damage. This forces tactical adaptation. Warriors, accustomed to closing to melee range and overwhelming opponents through sustained strikes, find this approach counterproductive, each landed blow creating painful feedback that may force them to drop their weapons. The Deathkiss's most dangerous characteristic manifests only at the moment of its death. When finally killed, all of the electrical energy stored within its body discharges simultaneously in what has been termed the Death Shiver. This massive electrical burst radiates outward from the corpse in a wide radius, potentially killing or severely injuring everyone in the immediate area. Parties focusing their entire effort on bringing down the Deathkiss as quickly as possible may find themselves devastated by this final posthumous attack, turning their victory into a Pyrrhic one at best. On the opposite end of the size spectrum exists the eyeball, a tiny beholderkin species measuring merely 8 inches in diameter. These diminutive creatures possess a central eye used only for conventional vision and 4 smaller eye stalks. Unlike their larger kin, eyeballs are not solitary creatures. In the wild, they hunt in organized groups called pods, working together to bring down prey much larger than themselves. Their rays include Cause Fear, Daze, Mage Hand for manipulating objects at range, and Ray of Frost for cold damage. The eyeball's most significant limitation, compared to other beholderkin, is its inability to fire multiple rays simultaneously. Each round of combat, an eyeball can activate only one of its 4 eye rays, making individual specimens far less dangerous than their larger relatives. However, eyeballs compensate for this weakness through numbers. A pod of 6 eyeballs can deliver 6 different rays each round, coordinating their attacks to systematically disable and kill targets that any single eyeball would have no hope of threatening. The eyeball's small size and relative intelligence have led to an unusual relationship with mortal spellcasters. Evil wizards and sorcerers frequently capture and train eyeballs to serve as familiars, bound through magical pacts to their masters. An eyeball familiar provides all the standard benefits of the familiar bond, the ability to deliver touch spells at range, shared senses, and enhanced perception. But the eyeball brings unique capabilities through its eye rays. Some spellcasters have even developed techniques for converting their familiar's eyes into temporary channels for their own magic, creating what amounts to an additional limb for spell delivery. The Gouger represents something entirely different from these naturally evolved or magically mutated variants. This creature is an artificial construct, engineered specifically as a weapon of war by the Faerûm's ancient enemies of the Beholders locked in eons-long conflict. The Gouger is a 10-foot wide monstrosity that superficially resembles a beholder but has been purpose-built for a single function: hunting and killing true eye tyrants. The Gouger's 10 eye stalks are completely non-functional, spastically twitching appendages without any magical capability whatsoever. It moves not by flying but by scuttling on 4 small limbs attached to its underside, giving it a disturbingly insectoid locomotion. What makes the Gouger dangerous to beholders specifically is its central eye, which projects an anti-magic cone identical to that of a true eye tyrant. This allows the Gouger to neutralize its target's primary weapons, rendering the beholder's eye rays useless while moving within striking range. The Gouger's actual weapon is a horrific tongue extending 15 feet from its mouth. This appendage strikes with enough force to cause significant damage to any target, but against beholders specifically, it carries an additional horrifying effect. A successful strike against a true beholder's eye stalks can permanently blind one of those magical eyes, destroying the eye ray permanently. The Gouger's entire tactical doctrine centers on closing with its target while maintaining anti-magic cone contact, then systematically destroying the beholder's eyes one by one until the eye tyrant is rendered helpless. What makes Gougers particularly disturbing from the beholder's perspective is their lack of self-preservation instinct. These creatures were engineered to be expendable assassins, driven more by fear of their Faerûn creators than by any natural survival drive. A Gouger will pursue a marked beholder target with single-minded determination, accepting damage that would cause any naturally evolved creature to flee. This ruthlessness, combined with their specific anti-beholder capabilities, makes them one of the few creatures that Eye Tyrants genuinely fear encountering. The Spectator represents yet another variant, though documentation of its full capabilities remains more fragmentary. These creatures are known to serve as guardians, often summoned through magical means to protect specific treasures or locations. Their perceptive abilities are enhanced even beyond the normal beholder standard, making them exceptionally effective at detecting intrusions or unauthorized access. The full extent of their magical capabilities and their relationship to true beholders remains a subject of ongoing scholarly investigation. This diversity of forms illustrates a fundamental strangeness about Beholderkin as a category. These are not subspecies in the conventional biological sense, produced through isolated populations, adapting to different environments over generations. The variations are too extreme, too specific, too clearly shaped by forces beyond natural selection. Each variant suggests different origins: magical experimentation, planar contamination, intentional engineering, or simply the warping influence of the far realm bleeding through into material reality. The Beholder Body Plan, the floating sphere with eyes, serves as a template that reality keeps replicating and distorting, producing an entire family of nightmares that share only that basic architecture and a general tendency toward malevolence. The existence of all these variants creates an additional layer of complication for the true beholder's already pathological psychology. Not only must it contend with other true beholders being offensive mockeries of proper form, but now there are these other spherical things with eyes, clearly attempting to copy the beholder form, but failing even more spectacularly. A beholder encountering a Goth does not think, "There is a lesser cousin of my species." It thinks, "There is a grotesque failure that dared to exist in a shape that almost resembles perfection," making its deviations all the more offensive. The hatred extends to all beholderkin without diminishment, each variant viewed as an insult to the true ideal of beholderhood embodied in the observing beholder. The terror and fascination inspired by beholders has inevitably led mortal practitioners of magic to attempt capturing and replicating their power. This pursuit has produced both spells and artifacts that channel or mimic the abilities of the Eye Tyrant, each representing a different approach to harnessing this alien capability for mortal purposes. The most extreme of these magical developments is the 8th level transmutation spell known as the Dreaded Form of the Eye Tyrant. This powerful magic represents not merely an attempt to gain beholder abilities, but to actually become a beholder, at least temporarily. The casting process is as disturbing as the result. When the spell activates, the caster's body does not transform gradually. It withers to dust immediately, leaving only the head. This disembodied head then rapidly grows, expanding into an oversized, misshapen orb. The caster's eyes fuse together into a single, massive central eye, while 10 eye stalks sprout from the skull, writhing and taking position around the transformed head. For the duration of the spell, the caster exists as a functional beholder. They gain enormously enhanced vitality, their hit points increasing dramatically to match the resilience of the creatures they are emulating. They can utilize the beholder's eye rays, projecting the same deadly effects that make Eye Tyrants so feared. However, the magic imposes significant limitations that prevent the transformed wizard from matching a true beholder's versatility. The spell restricts the caster to firing only 1 eye ray per round, a fraction of what a true Eye Tyrant can accomplish. Furthermore, each specific ray can only be fired once during the entire duration of the spell. The Disintegrate Ray, once used, cannot be used again until the spell is recast. These limitations suggest that the spell is not truly creating a beholder so much as forcing mortal flesh and magical theory into a beholder-shaped configuration. The result superficially resembles the real thing, but lacks the underlying alien nature that makes true beholders what they are. A wizard in dreaded form has access to the physical capabilities and magical attacks, but they remain, fundamentally, a wizard thinking with a mortal mind, limited by mortal magical theory, constrained by the structure of spell effects, rather than expressing inherent supernatural ability. The psychological effects of this transformation remain poorly documented, as few wizards willing to discuss their experiences have cast the spell and survived. Questions persist about what it feels like to temporarily abandon humanoid form for something so alien. Does the caster experience the beholder's sensory reality, perceiving 10 independent visual fields simultaneously? Do they feel the megalomaniacal certainty that defines beholder psychology, or do they retain their mortal sense of self, merely piloting a beholder's body like a vehicle? The spell's description provides no clarity on these points, suggesting that either the effects vary by caster, or that those who have experienced them prefer not to discuss the sensation of temporary alienness. Moving beyond spells to permanent magical items, the Beholder Crown represents an attempt to capture the Eye Tyrant's offensive capabilities in wearable form. This grotesque artifact consists of a bronze crown serving as the base structure, from which 10 metal stalks protrude upward and outward. Each stalk is tipped with a different gemstone, carefully selected and enchanted to serve as a magical eye. The gems glitter with inner light, suggesting the power they contain. The wearer of the Beholder Crown gains the ability to command these artificial eyes to fire rays identical to those of a true beholder. The Disintegrate Ray can reduce targets to dust. The Flesh-to-Stone Ray can petrify enemies, transforming them into permanent statuary. The Telekinesis Ray allows manipulation of distant objects or enemies. The exact complement of rays available varies between individual crowns, as each is crafted slightly differently, but all draw from the same pool of beholder eye ray effects. Unlike the spell transformation, the crown does not alter the wearer's body or provide enhanced resilience. The user remains in their original form, merely gaining access to beholder-like offensive capabilities. This creates interesting tactical implications. A wizard wearing the crown can combine the eye rays with their own spells, creating a versatility that even true beholders cannot match. However, the crown also marks the wearer unmistakably. The metal stalks and glittering gems make concealment impossible, announcing to all observers that this individual possesses dangerous magical capabilities and should be treated as a priority threat. The creation process for such artifacts requires both tremendous skill and morally questionable practices. Some accounts suggest that the gems must be harvested from actual beholder eyes, enchanted through processes that bind fragments of the creature's power into the stones. Other sources claim that the gems are conventional materials subjected to rituals that imprint beholder-like properties onto them. The truth likely varies by crown, with different artificers using different methods to achieve similar results. The ocular armor and shields crafted by the Cult of the Great Mother in Skullport represent a different approach entirely. Rather than attempting to replicate the beholder's offensive capabilities, these items focus on capturing its defensive advantages. The armor and shields feature multiple small eyes on short stalks, each blinking and moving independently, searching in all directions simultaneously. These eyes are not merely decorative. They function, providing the wearer with genuine all-around vision identical to that possessed by beholders. This sensory enhancement translates directly into combat advantages. A warrior wearing ocular armor cannot be flanked. Rogues cannot gain sneak attack bonuses by positioning themselves behind the wearer. Ambushes become far less effective when the target can see in all directions simultaneously. The wearer also becomes exceptionally alert to their surroundings, the multiple independent eyes catching details and movement that would escape normal human perception. The psychological adjustment required to use ocular armor effectively cannot be understated. The human brain did not evolve to process visual information from multiple independent sources simultaneously. Initial wearers reportedly experienced severe disorientation, nausea, and splitting headaches as their minds struggle to integrate the conflicting visual feeds. Only through practice and time does the brain adapt, learning to process the information from all eyes without becoming overwhelmed. Some wearers never fully adjust, finding the sensory overload intolerable and abandoning the armor despite its tactical advantages. The creation of ocular armor reveals the disturbing devotion of the Great Mother's cult. These worshippers venerate beholders as the ideal form of life, attempting to reshape themselves to more closely resemble their spherical idols. The armor represents a step in that transformation, allowing them to experience a fragment of the beholder's sensory reality. Some cultists take this much further, undergoing magical and surgical modifications to add actual eye stalks to their bodies or reshape their forms into more spherical configurations. These attempts at self-transformation rarely end well, most often producing hideously deformed individuals who have sacrificed their humanity without gaining any genuine beholder capabilities. Beyond these specific items, the broader influence of beholder imagery and capability appears throughout magical tradition. Minor enchantments exist to grant temporary all-around vision. Spell research into replicating specific eye ray effects has produced arcane formulas that achieve similar results through conventional magical theory rather than beholder-specific properties. The Eye Tyrant has become a template that wizards study and attempt to deconstruct, seeking to understand the principles underlying its abilities so those principles can be applied more broadly. This research often proves dangerous in unexpected ways. Beholders, with their paranoid intelligence, are fully aware that mortal spellcasters study them and attempt to replicate their powers. They view this as simultaneously insulting and threatening insulting, because these inferior creatures presume to copy the perfection of beholder form, threatening because successful replication could create rivals or enemies with beholder-like capabilities. Wizards, known to be researching beholder-related magic, sometimes find themselves targeted for elimination, the beholder's reasoning that destroying the researcher now prevents potential problems later. The irony of all this magical mimicry is that even the most successful attempts produce only pale shadows of true beholder capability. The spell transformation is temporary and limited. The crown provides some offensive rays, but not the complete arsenal or the anti-magic cone. The armor grants all-around vision, but not the intelligence and tactical acumen to fully exploit it. None of these artificial solutions capture the fundamental alienness of the beholder, the sense that this creature operates on principles entirely outside terrestrial nature. The magic can replicate specific capabilities, but it cannot replicate the underlying reality that produces those capabilities in the first place. In attempting to channel beholder power, mortal magic users may be revealing more about the limits of arcane theory than about the nature of beholders themselves. These creatures do not cast spells. They do not manipulate magical energy according to structured formulas. They simply are, and their abilities manifest as natural extensions of their being. When a wizard casts dreaded form of the Eye Tyrant, they are not becoming a beholder. They are using magic to temporarily force reality, to treat them as if they were a beholder, a subtle but crucial distinction. The spell is an elaborate illusion in the ontological sense, a lie told to the universe that the universe temporarily accepts. But reality knows the truth, and when the spell ends, the natural order reasserts itself, returning the caster to their proper mortal form. The existence of these spells and artifacts demonstrates both the terror and fascination that beholders inspire. Mortal practitioners of magic recognize these creatures as perhaps the most dangerous magical threats in existence, yet they cannot resist attempting to harness that power for themselves. Each crown crafted, each transformation spell researched, each piece of ocular armor forged represents an acknowledgement of the beholder's supremacy in the sphere of magical combat. The irony would not be lost on beholders themselves if they ever bothered to think deeply about it. The inferior creatures they despise spend enormous effort trying to become more like them, implicitly validating the beholder's belief in its own perfection. But beholders would not find satisfaction in this validation. They would find only further evidence of the inferiority they already knew existed. Of course, the lesser beings attempt to copy the superior form. What else would creatures so fundamentally flawed do except desperately grasp at any fragment of true perfection they might obtain? The attempt is simultaneously predictable and pathetic, confirming rather than challenging the beholder's worldview. And so the cycle continues. Mortals study beholders seeking their power, beholders despise mortals for their presumption, and both continue existing in mutual incomprehension, separated not by mere species difference, but by fundamentally incompatible ways of perceiving reality. To face a beholder is to confront an entity that operates entirely outside the normal rules of existence. Whether encountering a true eye tyrant, orchestrating a reign of terror from its vertical lair, a magic-devouring goth, an electrical death kiss haunting deep caverns, or any of the other spherical nightmares that share that basic body plan, adventurers must understand that they are not simply fighting a powerful monster. They are engaging with something fundamentally alien, something whose very existence represents a rejection of natural law, something whose mind follows paths of logic utterly incomprehensible to terrestrial thinking. The spheres of many eyes look upon the multiverse and see only a reality that belongs to them, waiting to be subjugated or turned to dust. Every other being exists to acknowledge their supremacy or to be eliminated as an obstacle to that acknowledgement. There is no negotiation possible with this psychology, no common ground to be found, no appeal that can be made to shared values or mutual benefit. The beholder is supreme. All others are inferior. This is the foundation of their existence, and no evidence or argument can shake it. This is what makes them truly terrifying. Not merely their power, though that power is considerable. Not merely their intelligence, though they are brilliant in their alien way. What makes beholders the nightmare they are is the absolute certainty with which they perceive themselves as the rightful masters of all reality, and the cold, calculating efficiency with which they work to make that perception into truth. The spheres of many eyes see everything, judge it all as wanting, and begin the methodical process of correction through domination or destruction. In this way, every beholder encountered is not merely an opponent to be defeated, but a force of pure alien will that must be stopped before it reshapes reality according to its twisted ideal.